I would argue, Ben, it's asymmetric warfare. I don't know if warfare is the right term, but I mean, you've got billion-dollar corporations with huge deep learning machines against your little brain and my little brain, and it's just not a fair fight. And so I guess the question I would have for you, Ben, is when the mind gets welded shut, what do you do next? I mean, what do you do about that?
Well, frankly, there's not a lot you can do once it's being welded shut. I think what we can do, however, is to try to prevent more minds from being welded shut. And I think that is possible. And that's really why, I left the asset management firm where I was, working to start my own independent company. Because you have to get outside of the belly of the beast. You have to get outside of one of those institutions that has $1 billion and is trying to, get their message across. And so what I think what one can do, not to make yourself immune to the effect, but to make yourself insulated from the effect. An inoculated against the effect was something you have to keep getting booster shots from,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Is what I was describing earlier. Once you see it, right, and once somebody describes to you, oh, that's what Robinhood is doing. They are intentionally getting you to, and they're using words like level up, right, to get you to use options, right? Yeah, I'll give you a ton more examples from investing. ETFs, exchange traded funds, right?
Yeah.
ETFs don't exist for your benefit, Brian. ETFs exist for the benefit of the people who make the ETFs, of the asset management firms.
Yeah, you don't say.
Yeah, right. But you'd never think, oh, no, this is good for you, right? This is and 1,001 examples of this. Once you, however, though, I think once you can kind of create that sort of intellectual distance, once you can step back from the poker table and say, oh, okay, I'm now looking at the game that's being played. Again, once you see it once, you'll see it everywhere.
It's ridiculous. I couldn't agree with that more. Once I started looking into this, Ben, I could not unsee it. There's a science fiction writer named Neil Stephenson who I like a lot, and he wrote a book called I think it's called Fall or Dodge in Hell. Have you ever?
I've read it. Yeah.
So the beginning of that book talks about there's essentially two categories of people. There's people that have had their minds completely and totally welded shut by technology and social media, and they think there's been a nuclear attack on the Moab facility in Utah, and it turns out the whole thing didn't happen. And so I was sitting there when I was reading this book going, wow, man, we're really headed towards something like this. And then I started reflecting on it, and I said, I think we're already there.
We're already there.
Yeah.
It's so right. So that's what I try to write about in Epsilon Theory, and that really is the goal, right? That to create that intellectual, emotional distance, both from corporations, from political parties. And none of this is meant to try to say, oh, go off the grid and, not to participate, not to be in the world.
Don't be Ted Kaczynski.
Exactly. I'm not suggesting that. I'm really not.
Let's not go too far with this. Let's interact with the world, but let's do it in a mature and wise way. Is maybe what you're saying.
Distance.
Yeah.
It's reclaiming your distance. I think it's both the hardest thing to do, and I fail at this every day. Right? I'll read some tweet or I'll read something and I'll go, because it's literally the physical impact on my brain chemistry and everything else. And so no one's perfect in this, and it does require just constant self-reflection, but there are some kind of simple ways to do it. Like I always ask myself when I see something that's making me mad or aggravated, say, why am I reading this now? Right? But what is we call it the meta game, right? Why is this being published now? Right? Can I step back and give myself a little bit of distance? There's a wonderful story. There was you're talking about before we started about a podcast you did with a Hollywood producer. Yeah, so another author and then turns Hollywood producers, Michael Crichton, right? So Jurassic Park probably is best known, but for me it was Andromeda Strain, right? I don't know if you remember that book from
Sure, yeah.
way back in the day. But Michael Crichton really invented the scientific thriller. So such a long list of books, whether it's Westworld, right? Jurassic Park, Disclosure. He wrote one about the aircraft industry, airframe or something like that, right? So he invented that whole scientific thriller genre. But he was giving a talk, and he was talking about narrative and the way that we're hardwired to respond to these. And he said, I've decided to call this the Gell-Man amnesia, after his buddy Murray Gell-Man. So Murray Gell-Man's a physicist. He's the discoverer, at least he named quarks, right? So that was Murray Gell-Man's claim to fame. But Crichton was giving this talk, and he said, I've decided to call this Gell-Man amnesia because I've figured this out by talking to my friend Murray. That you'll be reading the newspaper, and let's say it's a story that I know a lot about, some Hollywood story comes out, and I'll read that story about Hollywood, and I'll think, oh my God, this is just a crock. They just totally got this story wrong.
Yep.
The causality is wrong. The participants are wrong. Everything's wrong about this story. And Crichton says, and this is so true, if you've ever had a story about you or your company written about in the newspaper, you know exactly what he's saying. You read that story and you say, this is nonsense. This is ridiculous. Right? But he says, but then I'll turn the page and I'll read a story, about something about which I don't have a lot of inside information, personal information. Maybe it's a story about physics. Maybe it's a story about Palestine. And I'll read that story right after I've read this story that I thought to myself, oh my God, this is just totally wrong. They totally messed it up. I'll read this new story after I turn the page and I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, didn't know that. We have this amnesia effect that even though we'll read a story where we really know the real facts and we think, oh my God, this story that I'm reading, this is nonsense. We turn the page and the next story we read, we go, that's interesting. It's that amnesia. It's that inability to step back and say, okay, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm just saying read it with some critical distance. It's so hard for us to do as human beings. But it's never been more necessary, Brian. It's never been more necessary to find that critical distance with all the messages that we get barraged by. Because otherwise we lose ourselves. And that's the intent of the people who are writing these messages.